how many people here are familiar with Conway's Law? Okay. How many of you think you could recite it verbatim from memory? I'm not going to test you. And have you read in its entirety the original article that spawned Conway's Law? Okay. Nobody ever answers yes to that. Nobody's actually ever read the whole article. Yes, I have, multiple times. And that's where this talk came from. And what I want to do today is I want to walk you through the logic and the implications of Conway's article and actually dig into some really interesting things that very few people know about or talk about. So Conway's Law comes from a 1968 article written by Melvin Conway. And at the time he was a software engineer and manager, and he was trying to understand how do you design good systems and how do you design systems well. And it's important to understand that for Conway, a system could be anything from a piece of software to a piece of legislation. And what he understood across all of those domains is that if you're trying to design something of a sufficient level of complexity, you can't represent it as a single monolithic atomic thing. You have to break it down in some fashion. Your website has a home page, it has a search engine, it has a recommendation feature, it has a shopping cart. And once you do that, you now have to approach the design of that system on 3 levels. First, how should each component work and what should it look like? Secondly, how do the components communicate with or relate to each other? And third, how does that system of components and relationships emerge back into a coherent whole? Because what you're trying to develop is a website, not just a bunch of disembodied modules. Conway then turned his attention to the process of designing these kinds of systems and made a parallel set of observations. Again, if you're designing something with a sufficient level of complexity, you can't do it with a single monolithic atomic person or group. You have to break it down, again, in some fashion. You figure out the search engine, I'll figure out the shopping cart. And again, you now have to approach this on 3 levels. How do you design components that work well and look right? How do you communicate with other design groups? And how does this system of groups and communications emerge back into a coherent organization that's more or less building the same thing in more or less the same way? Now, it's easy to see that these two mirror each other, but Conway took it a step further, and he observed that one drives the other. That the shape of your organization determines the shape of your system. And I had an experience early in my career that perfectly illustrates this principle in action. There was a team of 4 guys. They were building a large, sophisticated application. They were all very skilled and experienced, a little egotistical, and they had something of a rivalry among themselves. So what they did was they carved the application up into 4 big pieces and said to each other, you go figure out your piece and I don't want to know about it. And I'm going to figure out my piece and I'm not going to tell you about it. And off they went. Now in those days, one of the things you had to figure out in every large application was something called memory management. And typically what you do is you get together and you design a common memory management module that would get used throughout the application. So who can guess how many memory management modules this application ended up having?
5.
4. Each team member designed his own to do more or less the same thing in a completely different way, used it in his part of the application, and ignored all of the others. And among other things, what this meant was that if a new person joined the team, they were going to have to learn 4 different ways to do the same thing and understand where and how to use it across this very large application. So in his article, Conway expressed this principle with the following sentence, which has become known as Conway's Law. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. In other words, the way you work together determines what you make. Now, Conway's Law is expressed as a constraint, something we have no control over. But more and more software companies are learning how to use it to their advantage by doing what's become affectionately known as the reverse Conway. And the principle is really simple. If you want to end up with a particular kind of architecture, if you make your organization look that way, you're guaranteed to get it. And so companies are figuring out that the most important thing for them is the ability to go fast, to quickly, continuously, and safely deliver change. And the best way to do that is to break large applications into small, self-contained, loosely coupled components called microservices. But what they also understand is in order to make that work, they have to do the same thing to their organization. And so they've broken their organization into the proverbial two pizza teams, small, self-contained teams that have everything they need, product, development, design, QA, operations, and support in order to run a service. Now, the DevOps community has really taken hold of Conway's Law. You can't shake a stick at a DevOps conference anymore without hearing the name Conway. But it's not actually the entirety of his article. And in the last page or so, he drops this nugget of wisdom that to me is more interesting and provocative, and depending on what you make of it, potentially more disturbing. And he starts with the following statement. Given any system design, someone will find a better one to do the same thing. In other words, there's no such thing as a perfect design. We design things the best we can based on what we know at the time. I can't count the number of times that I have gone back and looked at something I did a year ago and thought, well, that was a really dumb way to do that. If I knew then what I know now, I would have done this really differently. In addition, no matter how much user testing and no matter how much iteration you do, you can't perfectly predict how customers are actually going to use your designs until they do it for real. And then you discover that while you thought you were trying to solve problem X, it was really problem X plus Y, or maybe it was X minus Y. And furthermore, the very act of using something changes the user. In other words, it changes the design problem. Social media has profoundly transformed who we are and how we relate to each other, and in the process, it's transformed our expectations of social media. The kinds of problems that Facebook and Twitter face today are very different from the ones they faced when they started, and there's no way they could have predicted those problems because they didn't exist yet. So you could say that as important as the ability to design is the ability to redesign. But don't we have a problem here? Isn't Conway's Law a catch-22? Doesn't it tell us that we are doomed to forever stamp out the same designs over and over again? And this is why Conway made the statement at the very end of his article that to me is profound and worthy of deep contemplation. When he said that flexibility of organization is important to effective design. Okay? Let's say we buy into that. How are we supposed to do it without falling into some kind of reorg madness? The same organization I worked at with the 4 guys who built the 4 memory managers also had this habit of doing a company-wide reorg every year and a half or so, where they would switch from being a project organization to a product organization to a matrix organization and back again. So then every couple of years they would make this big announcement. We need to be product-centric because of blah. We need to be project-centric because of blah. And the amount of time, energy, money, and waste that was involved was phenomenal. Well, to some degree, microservices and microservice teams point us in the right direction. Because what they're really about is shifting us away from this industrial era machine metaphor model of systems and organizations, where we try and figure out what all the pieces are and how they all fit together and lock everything down as tightly as we can so that everything runs smoothly and efficiently. And towards a more post-industrial complex systems model, where you have a lot of simple components that can interact with each other very fluidly and dynamically, and as a result, they achieve a level of flexibility and adaptability and resilience. The problem is that if all we do is shatter our systems and shatter our organizations into lots of little pieces, we risk replacing a few large silos with 1,000 little ones. We still have the problem of how the pieces come together into a coherent whole, because that's what our customers need. Well, luckily, the answer is right in front of us. And it's right in the words that we already use. And in particular, the word service. We have left the product economy and fully entered the service economy. You know, you can't even buy a font anymore and download it onto your website. Instead, you license it, and the font vendor serves it up from their IT systems. So font companies have gone from being product companies to being service companies. And the thing about service is that it's different, and it's different in ways that may be more profound than we realize. Value is no longer something that you pour into an object and hand to a customer in exchange for money. Service value doesn't fully manifest until somebody actually uses your service. The fact that you operate an airport and you have runways and airplanes and security gates and coffee shops doesn't do anyone any good until someone shows up and actually tries to fly to another city. And when they do, they bring with them their particular needs and moods and experiences, and those interact with your service systems and with your employees' needs and moods and experiences. And this has the effect of taking the sausage factory of operations, which traditionally has been hidden behind the scenes, back office as it were, and bringing it forward and making it an explicit part of the value equation. I'm sure we've all had the experience of calling customer support and getting bounced from one agent to the next and one department to the next, and constantly having to re-enter your personal information. And what happens is that the service provider's workflows and IT systems, and to some degree even their org chart and their history of corporate acquisitions, all begin to surface and directly impact the quality of the customer experience. So how do we design for service? How do we operate for service? Well, we have to start to turn our attention outward and upward, away from ourselves and what we do and what we make, and towards our customers and their larger goals and needs. What is it that they're trying to accomplish that they need our help with? And interestingly, perhaps the best definition of service that I've encountered comes from, of all places, ITIL. ITIL spends a lot of time talking about service management and service operations. And they start by trying to define this word service. And they do it with this wonderful phrase, which is facilitating desirable outcomes. What's important is not the CRM system that you build and operate. What's important is what the sales force can accomplish because of the CRM system that you build and operate. And a very important point that I want to make, and maybe the most important one, is that service is fractal. It's service all the way down. Your company is a service provider. Your HR and IT departments are service providers. Your design and development and QA and operations teams are service providers. Your microservices and microservice teams are service providers. At every level, it is no longer your job just to do what you do. Instead, it's to help other parts of the organization create something larger, and by extension, to help your customers create something larger. Now, if we dig a little deeper into this idea of service and what it means, we could see it as a set of promises. Amazon promises to help you get everything you need in your life, from shaving cream to snow tires to books, as quickly and easily and conveniently as possible. And to do that, they make other promises. If you have an important business meeting and you're out of shaving cream and you give them an extra $5, they promise that you'll get your shaving cream on Tuesday instead of Thursday. They promise that even though they try to automate their relationship with you as much as possible, if you need help and you call customer service, the person who answers the phone will be knowledgeable and courteous and will stay on the line with you until your problem is solved. And to keep that promise, they make other internal ones, like promising to evaluate their employees by metrics like first-time resolution instead of metrics like average call time. We can define a promise as a voluntary commitment to provide benefit. It's something we sign up for. And that's really important, because promises come from the bottom up and the inside out, in contrast to requirements raining down from on high. And this means that promises can serve as the attractive force that pulls our systems and organizations back together into the coherent wholes that we need without making them brittle or rigid. Now, you may wonder about this word promise. On the one hand, it's very intuitive. You all know what a promise is. How do you say promise in German? Okay. We all know what it is, and we all make promises to each other every day. But you may think, well, why promise? Why not contract or guarantee? Well, the thing about promises is sometimes they get broken. We don't always keep our promises. And this is actually really good, because it forces us to account for the possibility of failure, and as a result, it ironically increases our chances of success. I had an experience a while back where I was trying to get paid by a large European client, and they had to send me an international wire transfer, and my bank wasn't really set up properly for it, so it wasn't working. And we went around several times, and it kept failing, and I started to get frustrated because I wasn't getting paid. And my client at this organization also started to get frustrated, to the point where they sent a scathing email to their internal accounts payable department that they CC'd me on, saying, why can't you take the lead to solve these problems so that our vendor, who was kind enough to fly to Europe and help us, can get paid for his time? And the problem was that the AP department was not equipped to think about what to do if something went wrong. What promises do is they unify design and operations, because they force us to continually think about what happens. Are we keeping our promises? Are we operating effectively? And if not, what needs to change? And more interestingly, are we making the right promises? Are we promising to pay our vendors on time? Or are we merely promising to enter data into a system and report back the results, whatever those results might be? And if not, what needs to change? Promises also unify systems and organizations, because we can use exactly the same language and exactly the same conceptual model to talk about system promises, about things like functionality and availability and scalability and security, that we do to talk about promises between people and groups. In fact, you could look at things like Lean UX and DevOps as new kinds of promises between parts of the organization. Instead of promising to deliver code every 3 months that works on my laptop, I promise to deliver code every 3 hours that works in a reasonable facsimile of production. And when you put these two together, the unity of design and operations and the unity of systems and organizations, you can achieve the organizational flexibility that was so important to Conway. And when you deeply understand the nature of service as a never-ending process of making and keeping and repairing promises, you begin to see design as continuous. Continuous in the sense that we do it continuously through time, Continuous in the sense that we do it throughout the life cycle. We do it in production and operations as much as we do it anywhere else. Continuous in the sense that we see the design of systems and the design of ourselves as the organizations that make those systems as inseparable. And continuous in the sense that we do it at every level of the organization. Now, when people talk about organizational design, they tend to focus on explicit organizational structures. But the problem with silos is not that they're separate. The problem is not that the designer and the developer and the tester and the sysadmin report to different managers. The problem with silos is that they don't breathe and they have no way to connect with each other to create something larger. I have had the honor in my career of working with some really excellent service agencies, both in IT and design, and been around people who deeply understood what it means to truly empathize with their customers and to go beyond their expectations of what they think they're supposed to be doing at any point in time, and to understand what it is their customer really needed. And as a result, they were able to increase customer satisfaction. They were able to deliver greater value. They were able to generate entirely new lines of business. And they were able to actually begin to dissolve the boundaries between themselves and their customers. And if you find yourself wondering how this relates to IT operations, you need to look no further than Amazon Web Services. In my opinion, at least, the reason they're so far ahead of their competitors is not because they're cheaper, or because they have more VMs, or more data centers, or more regions, or what have you. It's because they are continuously reading their customers' minds and understanding what their customers are trying to accomplish and how they can use and stretch their expertise to help them better solve existing problems and actually start to foresee new ones that their customers didn't even know exist. So in closing, I want to leave you with this thought. When people ask me, can you do DevOps or design thinking or Agile or what have you, across organizational silos? Can you do it with outsourced vendors? Can you do it with offshoring? To me, that's not the essential question. To me, the essential question at every level, whether you're talking about running a company or running an IT department or running a help desk, is how do I begin to shift my emphasis away from this is who I am, this is how I'm structured, this is what I do, this is what I make, to this is how I help, this is how I serve. Because to serve really is the essence of service, and service really is the essence of the new economy and the new IT. So thank you very much, and if you're interested in learning more about the relationship between service and promises and continuous design, I've written a book which has been published by O'Reilly called Designing Delivery, and I would love to continue the conversation. My company is Engineering IT. I'm on Twitter at Jeff Sussna, so thank you.